Welcome to the first lecture in Module 1, the role of technology in virtual K-12 education. In this lecture, we're going to be focused on two lesson outcomes. First, we're going to talk about the broad role of technology in virtual education, and then second, we're going to talk about how you can develop and apply a framework for identifying when and why you might want to use technologies. We'll then in later lectures talk about where and how you'll use these technologies. We are going to make an assumption though, moving forward. In fact, from this lecture on for the duration of the course, I am assuming that you all have already decided to offer virtual education. And virtual education, I mean students 100% at a distance. You could definitely apply these same concepts to blended and flipped environments, but I want to really focus on fully virtual, 100% online. You don't see your students, or if you do see your students, it's like a 90-10 rule where you have them virtually 90% of the time and 10% of the time you get to see them because they're coming in for various checkpoints or trainings or reflection. So, knowing that you want to offer 100% virtual learning, you now must identify where, when, how, and why you might actually want to use emerging trends and technologies. So we're going to start with the why, and there are three components to the why. The first component is your students. We've all heard a lot about the millennial generation. We know they're very social, they're very community focused. They're often called the me generation because they very much want feedback and instantaneous feedback quite often, and they want individualized or very personalized learning experiences presented to them. We also know they're very highly visual. We know that they're oftentimes very hard to engage because they're avid multitaskers, so we have to think very creatively about how to engage them. And finally, we know they're technology natives. They are born with the technology that they will be using in your learning experiences. And this is a good thing because this means that they are prepared to learn the content and the concepts and the skills that you will be presenting using these emerging trends and technologies. And you're not going to have to worry about them having to figure out how to use the technology itself. So now the second component to why is the learning. The good news is learning theory aligns very nicely with good technology use. And in fact, many of the technologies that we're going to be talking about in the duration of this course align very, very nicely to some of the more popular learning technologies today that feed the millennial generation very well. The first cluster of those theories is social learning, collaborative learning, active learning, social constructivist learning, things that are involving students to participate in learning activities in groups that are very interactive, very action-oriented, and that encourage them to be social or to develop knowledge in a collective, much like what we're doing here in this MOOC. The second clump of learning theories that align themselves very nicely with good technology use are the ones that are focused on students getting very practical or hands-on learning experiences. You've got apprenticeship models, you've got problem-based learning, constructivist learning, even active learning in this case as well, where students are actually able to operate in simulations. They can use games that replicate real-life events in order to grasp concepts or skills or develop problem-solving skills in more depth. So that the fact that learning theory aligns itself nicely is an advantage because we're already applying these theories to our traditional educational environments. We now know that in the virtual setting we can apply these types of learning theories very well, and in fact certain technologies align themselves very nicely to these. Now we know that this millennial generation wants to learn with devices and is as an avid user of the internet and the social network out there available to us through technologies. We know the millennial learner wants to learn in groups, wants to learn from one another, wants to have fun and be engaged within a community of learners. We know the millennial learner wants to be able to be hands-on and building things and crafting things and practically applying the knowledge that they're building to real-world problems and finding solutions. And finally, we know that we, as educators, want that millennial learner to be able to leave our environments with skills that provide them with the ability to be active community members and effective contributors to our society, because they have the skills to be effective in their further education or jobs that they're going to go undertake once they leave us. Now, the third component of the why is the course and the program, or even the curricula. So we can benefit the students and they want this kind of learning. We can utilize learning theories very, very well that can ground our practice of using these emerging trends in our virtual education. And finally, these technologies and trends can help us as educators create and deliver better courses, better program, better institutions, better curricula. And this is because these emerging trends and technologies often provide us with broader reach. We can bring more students together with broader and diverse backgrounds so that they can create this sort of quilt of experiences that's very unique, and that helps students build and learn more from one another than they would even from us as educators. These programs also give us access to really rich data, and they give us an opportunity to encourage collaboration and communication that could never really be done in a traditional face-to-face setting. And finally, they allow us to be much more efficient in how we deliver education, so that we can focus on the learning experiences. I often talk with virtual teachers and they tell me that it's really cool that they can transfer a lot of the administrative tasks to the technology so that they can spend more time getting to know students. And in fact, they find that they get to know their students much more in depth and much more personally in a virtual environment because they can do that. So here's your first question. I am teaching a high school pre-calculus class. It's entirely online. And my students struggle with the derivatives lessons. It comes about 2/3 of the way through the year. And they tend to be really disengaged. They don't understand why they need to learn derivatives. Doesn't mean anything to them. And their grades tend to drop on the questions or the exams focused on derivatives. So I'm thinking I should look for a technological solution. Maybe there's some way I can use a new technology as opposed to just maybe my recorded lecture for helping them learn derivatives. What do you think? Should I or shouldn't I look for a technology solution? And if so, why? So we've talked about the why you might want to use emerging trends and technologies in K-12 education. Let's talk about the when. I believe that there are 3 opportunities that lend themselves very nicely to the use of emerging trends and technologies. The first is when you want to provide access to something. So beyond your classroom environment, probably a learning management system or a virtual learning environment, depending on where you're from, beyond that, and the access, to perhaps internet links or recorded videos or some documents and readings that you create, technology can give students access to even better resources or more up-to-date resources or simulations or games or interactive opportunities for them to engage and apply the concepts that you're teaching them to real-world settings. So if you're providing access, this is a good opportunity to use technologies. This is also a good opportunity when we're thinking about access if you're trying to help students that may have disabilities get access to things that they wouldn't normally be able to have access to. The second opportunity is when you want to improve learning outcomes. So just like my example before, I hope you all said that was a good opportunity for technology use, because that's an opportunity where my traditional mode of teaching, a lecture explanation around what a derivative is and a reading and some problem sets, isn't cutting it. So now I'm going to look for some resources, perhaps some interactive games or opportunities where students can learn how derivatives apply to real-world settings. And if I do that, I can then hopefully improve learning outcomes or have students learn more about derivatives or be able to apply derivatives more effectively. And then finally, the third opportunity when you might want to use technology is when you can create opportunities for continuous improvement. We always need to learn how to better the educational opportunities that we're providing. So if technology can help us get the data or get the feedback so that we can figure out where to do this in a much more timely fashion, oftentimes in a just-in-time fashion, that is a great opportunity for use of technology. Now note, while there are these 3 areas that are really important for finding opportunities to use technology, If you're addressing one, you don't necessarily have to also address the other two, but you don't want to detract from the other two as well. So you don't want to employ a technology that creates a great opportunity for continuous improvement, but suddenly limits students' access to some materials, or worse yet, actually decreases their effectiveness for understanding a particular concept or building the knowledge that we're hoping them to build. So I often get asked as well, how do I know when I should use a particular technology or not? Is this a good opportunity for me to use blank technology? Well, here's a quick list for you of things to think about. Does this technology provide your students with, and here's a list of some questions you can ask yourself so that you can make sure that you've got some good opportunities to use a particular technology. Now, it doesn't have to address all of these. It could just address one. But if you're not able to address any of these, that's probably a place where you don't want to necessarily use that technology. Here's your second part of your question. I'm back in that pre-calculus class, and I mentioned that I want to use an online game to help students understand where derivatives apply in the real world, particularly in the mechanical functionings of the real world around them. This is a good use of technology, but why? Finally, now that we've talked about the why and the when, we need to think about the where and the how of using virtual technologies in K-12 education. We're going to talk in the next couple modules about where and how you might want to use technologies, particularly some of the new emerging technologies, to present and distribute content, to help students collaborate with one another and to build knowledge together, to provide better channels for communication between you and your students and among all of your students, and perhaps even guest speakers or other experts in the field. And then finally, as a way to conduct assessment both of your students and of the programs and curricula around you. So dive into the next lecture where we'll be focusing on presenting and distributing content.